Well, hello there, my fellow peak fiction connoisseurs. If you've clicked on this video, I can only imagine that you're looking for one thing, and that's peak fiction. Well, good news for you, because I got something perfect for you. Today, we're sitting down to talk about Evil West, which is dropping this week for $60 on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. I played it on PC, and this game jived with me so much, man. I was really happy with my experience once the credits rolled. So let's not delay any further. You know the drill. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We do day one reviews all the time. If you're current here, hit the bell notification. I never remind you to do that. So please do that for me. You don't want to miss a video. With that, let's sit down to talk about Evil West. This game is such a Matty game. What is a Matty game? I love a blender style game where you throw a little bit of this in here, a little bit of that in here, a little inspiration from that, mechanic from here, a level from there. Let's blend it all up and you've got this new thing here. So if I were to throw things in a blender to make Evil West, I'd throw a little God of War, a little bit of Doom Eternal. I'd throw in Damnation. Remember that cowboy game? That's redemption for this one. And last but not least, I'm going to throw the Order 1886 in there. You blend it all up and you get Evil West. This game is legit in my eyes. I'm really impressed with it. Let's start off with the universe. There's a reason why I'm using the term peak fiction. It's because I have not loved the lore for a game quite like this in some time. You will hear me talk about just how cool I think this universe is for years to come. It scratches a particular itch that very few games go for, which is alternate history. One of the reasons I love Wolfenstein, especially from Machine Games, is their approach to alternate history. That change up on the things that we know, and in my case, we're taught in school, I think is so fascinating. So here, you're playing as Jesse Rentier, and it's set in colonial America. Now, you may see some of the weapons you're using, the things you're wearing, you're like, that doesn't look super colonial. It's very steampunk. Well, humanity has mastered the powers of steam and lightning and have used it to advance their technology many years forward. Meanwhile, they're trying to fight off the necromancy threat. They're trying to fight off vampires and the undead. And in fact, there's one point in the game where you're going to find a little bit of lore that you'll see your dad, who's the leader of the Rentier Institute, a group dedicated to hunting down these vampires, shaking hands with Abraham Lincoln, signing a deal, agreeing to fight off the necromancy threat together. To me, that just makes all the synapses in my brain fire off. I love alternate history, I love vampires, and I love the approach here of cowboy with steampunk meets Doom meets God of War, and you're just going on this wild ride. It's so entertaining, where I can't say you're gonna love the narrative here. You're not gonna walk away and go, Jesse Rentier just made me feel things, but I feel like that's part of the charm, the B-tier nature of its delivery while having such an awe-inspiring world. It's visually impressive, but at the same time, you'll hear characters talking. The voice acting isn't bad. Just, for example, Jesse is a very much by the books kind of guy. He's very much like, I'm going to kick your ass, cowboy. And that's really, like, that's his kind of energy here. He's always pissed. He's always looking for a fight. That's his personality. And the people who surround him, I think, are admittedly more interesting, but you're not going to be walking away from the narrative talking about that. I think you're going to talk about the world, the interactions you have, the things that you see on your ride, and the way they've created technology in these colonial times. I just think it's so cool. That alternate history approach really jived with me. And I will say that there are some inconsistencies in the voice direction approach. So the voice acting, I don't think, is bad. The tone matches the scenes, but different actors seem to get different memos on how to pronounce certain things. So for example, the last name of your character is Rentier, or is it Rentier, or is it Rentier? There are so many characters that approach you and say it differently. And that's like one of those blemishes on the game where you could tell it was stretched a little thin in that regard, and it just wasn't cleaned up enough before launch. Not that the whole game represents that, but you can tell there's a little bit of that rough around the edges charm. I wouldn't say jank because it plays pretty smooth and it runs pretty smooth, at least on PC. There are those things that almost have that lovable blemish on it. And that's one of them, like hearing the last name multiple ways. So if that's a pet peeve of yours, just keep an eye out for it. But I don't really have much to say about the story than I do the universe. I think the technology and the way you interact with things, for example, using what's called the gauntlet, which is this whole gameplay mechanic we'll get into, and being able to charge it up with electricity and activate puzzles with it, It's that type of world building through interaction that I really dig, and they do such a phenomenal job here. Pretty much what you're going to be doing in this game is fighting off an army of vampires that are growing, and you're trying to contain the threat before it reaches the rest of the United States. So in a way, it manages to feel high stakes, and I love that because it's so ridiculous. What I also love about this game is it harkens back to a style of game design that I don't think we see a lot of, because a lot of the industry is so focused on a sense of openness and a sense of fidelity, that what happens here with Evil West is you actually get a game that's more, I'd say, designed like an Xbox 360, PS3 title. And I know some people will shiver and go, whoa. But what I mean by that is when you're approaching a combat scenario, you'll see there's a little hill you can leap over, and beyond that is a pretty open zone, which you know is going to be a place you're going to fight. The game telegraphs these moments constantly. It's not necessarily unique to Evil West, but it's something you're going to see. So you're able to almost mentally break up, like, this is an exploration section, this is going to be a combat section. And so it makes hunting down collectibles and coins and all that stuff kind of fun, and it reminded me again of a style of game design that I really do miss. I love the way Xbox 360 games are made, where I felt they were just open enough where they could have a focus like this game does, where you're not going to be always going off the beaten path, finding side quests. It is very much a one-track adventure, which I love about the game. But there are rooms for exploration, little puzzles you can do, things that you can break down, but they're not going to take dozens and dozens of hours of playtime to complete. This is a 10 to 13 hour experience, and it's, like I said, just one ride all the way through. But I love this style design. It's not going to be for everybody. I totally respect and understand that, but for me, it again scratched that very particular itch I have. I love that style of game design. I love this kind of alternate history. So it's checking a lot of Matty boxes here, and that may differ from person to person, especially because when you get into the combat, there is a lot of God of War inspiration here. And one thing we do need to recognize is God of War Ragnarok just dropped. I've been playing a little bit of it. It's awesome. And yeah, you know, the combat in that game is really good. So some people are going to step from that into this, and they're going to feel maybe a less than version of God of War. So you have to remember what games you're playing in the vicinity of Evil West. If you have the option to, I would actually suggest going into Evil West first and then playing God of War. Not because Evil West is better, but if you're interested in Evil West, you'll probably have a better time with its gameplay as you transition from that into God of War instead of going back. But that's not to disrespect the gameplay. It's just that the design is a little tighter in God of War. Everything's a little tighter in God of War. And what you get here is a game that I think has a lot of heart, a lot of passion, a lot of fun mechanics that are rolled out beautifully. But again, it doesn't quite reach the level of the mechanics it's inspired by. That's the issue with these blender style games. I love that I'm seeing a little bit of The Order 1886, a little bit of Doom, a little bit of God of War, a little bit of Damnation. I love that stuff. And outside of Damnation, which really wasn't that great of a game, you're seeing a game that isn't really reaching the level of Doom or isn't reaching the level of God of War, but it's doing a good enough job to imitate them and have these mechanics that typically aren't together all in one. So with that covered, let's talk about the specific mechanics. I want to get into the pace at which they're rolled out. One of my favorite things about this game is the pace at which you are delivered new tools, new mechanics. Every single chapter, pretty much, you are getting something new to play with, to use in a way. And what I love about the enemy design is, while it's not perfect, you will recognize that there isn't like one tool for one enemy. I call that the Arkham Knight syndrome, where Arkham Knight was a combat system that I thought was blown open way too wide, where it felt like they had 18 enemy types and each one had one particular weakness, so you were never really able to single out one target. What happens here is they're just adding another tool to your tool belt to weaken the overall group of enemies. Now, some of them have particular weaknesses and ways you can approach them, but most of them you can beat up and kill the same way. It's just, again, adding that extra tool. But I love the pace at which you get stuff. Just every chapter, it's a new thing. A new rifle, a new pistol, a new explosive, a new combo, a new way to chain attacks. It's just new. Every chapter feels fresh because they're always delivering fresh new mechanics. So while it may be a shorter adventure, it is a consistently thrilling and entertaining one because you're never doing the same thing for too long. It's just adding to an already, I think, robust combat system. What do I mean by that? The heart of the combat system is what's called the gauntlet. So it's this thing that you put on your hand, the gauntlet, right? And this thing is powered by lightning and steam, and you can really see, like, even in the design of it, the lightning's coursing through it. It's really awesome. And attached to it is a zapper. So the zapper is where I really felt the combat took off. At first, it's just you're brawling. The gauntlet's just this thing you beat the living hell out of enemies with. And you're like, okay, a lot of melee combat here. There's third-person shooting. All right, this doesn't feel too bad. As you get enemies low on health, you'll automatically execute them based off how you approach them, and you'll get some health backs. It encourages exploiting their weaknesses and comboing them up, but something felt like it was missing. By the third chapter, you get this thing called the zapper, and then it pops off. Now you're zipping into enemies, you're beating the life out of them, you're pulling them to you, you're beating the life out of them, and I'm like, oh, it's over now. Like, yo, this is awesome. So that is where it felt like the missing connection had been finally filled in. And it doesn't take long to get there, but that is where everything comes together. When you get the zapper, you have the gauntlet, and you have your guns, and they continue to add things like the shotgun, the explosives, and you're just exploiting enemy weaknesses constantly, where encounter after encounter, it is a blast. I had so much fun because you go into the upgrade tree. As you beat enemies, you're going to level up. It's not like you're going to hit enemies, you're going to see damage numbers, you're going to get experience. It just happens quietly in the background, which I do really like. But you're going to level up, you're going to get perks. Much like what I said with Sonic Frontiers applies here with the perk tree in Evil West. What I love about the perk tree in Evil West is it doesn't just exist to give you incremental upgrades on things that already exist, but instead new tools. One attack that you get that you just don't unlock in the story is called the Quake Punch. You pound the ground, electricity surrounds you, and it's a great AoE attack. That is something that you get through upgrading. And then the next upgrade is a second punch to the ground. And then the third upgrade is an insane ground pound that really coats the whole stage. The way that it evolves your approach to combat and adds truly useful things is relentless. And because of that, it's consistently entertaining, and I had a blast with it. It also helps that it generally feels good most of the time. There's the occasional moment that the dodging doesn't feel quite as tight, or that I would auto aim and snap to the wrong enemy, and that would sort of switch things up, or that the encounter design isn't as strong, which I'll explain in a little bit. There are moments of weakness, but overall it felt pretty good. It felt satisfying. The music was right in sync with the combat scenarios, where it was bombastic as you were plowing through enemies. The gore and dismemberment is really satisfying. It just has a charm of its own thanks to its world, and when you know the setting you're in, that you're doing these crazy things in, I think it makes it all the more cooler and kind of lifts it all up. Now, I did mention some of the encounter designs having some issues. Yes, as you get to the later part of the game, I did notice some encounters were a little more frustrating. It didn't happen that often in the first 10 chapters of the game. It was just rip-roaring. I was sitting there going, I can't believe I don't really have much to complain about. Like, there are the obvious ones such as, yeah, it's a little limited, it's a little linear, but I don't give a shit. But for me, for others, I know that stuff will matter. But otherwise, I was thinking, I really don't have a single complaint. Then this showed up, and there were some enemy encounters. I was thinking, guys, what were we doing here? Like, it was something I was able to overcome eventually after dying multiple times. The game does have a healthy challenge to it, but I mean, there were certain encounters where you were just in a really small space with huge enemies, and they had AoE attacks, and the only way that you could kill them was by breaking down the shield, which they'd eventually regenerate. So it was just super frustrating, where some encounters are designed much tighter than others. This also ties into boss fights, where some are better than others. There are some really good boss fights in this game. There's one in particular that isn't bad, but I wasn't crazy about. But yes, this game really does try to spread its mechanics far and wide, reaching into boss fights. And I think mechanically they're interesting enough. I think especially one that I won't spoil was really, really enjoyable. But all in all, it's a game that does a lot of things, and it shows the transformation of what I played at PAX versus what I got at release. So when I played at PAX, there were a lot of enemies that had health bars, and it seems like they tightened that up a little bit. Whereas now the health bars are saved for like the really big, mechanically deep enemies. And I like that because it shows a focus on design. Like, these all can't be bosses. Let's instead do a small handful, which is what they do. But it's kind of a classic formula. You're going to run through a level. You're going to find collectibles along the way. You're going to beat up enemies in these encounters that are clearly defined to you before you even get there. At the end of every level, you're going to fight a big bad boss, whether it be a mini boss or a truly huge one at big points in the story, is depending on where you're at in the story. And then you're going to move on to a little hub area. You're going to get your next mission, and off you go. Very, very Xbox 360 in that design. I like it. I like it a lot. I know some people are beyond that. They can't get into that type of game design. Just like, for example, when I talk about games with pixel art, some folks are like, yeah, it's just, I can't get into it anymore. I need fidelity. I used to when I was a kid, but I love fidelity now. Like, I totally respect it. I understand people's preference in game design. But to me, Evil West was not only a breath of fresh air in the way games are typically made, but also as someone who's playing God of War at the same time, it was kind of nice not to have someone chatting in my ear every 5 seconds on how to solve puzzles, how to take on enemy encounters, how to take out the enemy weaknesses. Like, I was able to figure it out myself. The game, for all its faults in its combat at times, is mentally engaging. I do have to look at the enemy, and it doesn't always point out, like, this is a weak spot. This is what you need to do. It very much encourages you to find out on your own, but it's not so hidden in a way that you're going to die 4 times and go, oh, that's what I was supposed to do. It walks a really tight line, and I think it does a good job of it. It also helps that this game is a looker. Now, I do think sometimes the level designers went a little bit crazy with the color grading, like especially in the opening parts of the game. The orange is really, really, really orange, and it's sometimes like overbearingly strong. And I understand what they were going for here. Color grading is like everything, especially in Unreal Engine, so I get what they were going for here, but sometimes it was done better than others, and I did find it particularly distracting. But all in all, from the alternate history approach to the really cool universe to the fun, thrilling combat where you're zipping, pounding everyone around, to shooting everyone. I mean, it's just a really, really good time. I had a lot of fun with Evil West, and I think, based off my experience on PC, it is worth the price of admission. Now, what I'm going to do is pump the brakes a little bit here, because I did notice when looking at the performance on Evil West for consoles that there were some spotty differences. Like, for example, the Xbox One S was running Evil West at the same level that the Series S was, and that's a problem. So I have a feeling the console part of things here may not be as strong, but over on PC, I had a blast. I played it on my weak PC, by the way, with no issues. I played it on medium, which is crazy for a 2022 game, on my 980 Ti. Not the worst graphics card in the world, but that PC is now 7 years old. So it's really up there. And the fact that this game ran really well on it and I didn't have to bog down everything was nice. But that's everything I have to say about Evil West. I now leave it in your hands. Are you interested in the game? What do you think about it? Fire away in the comments down below. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below. And a big thank you to all the patrons, all the members who continue to support the hell out of the content here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.